All right, we are good to go. Good evening, anyone catching us on Facebook or YouTube. My name is Nick Nowak with the Nick Nowak team, eXp Realty. In case you don't follow us, every month or so we try to do a quick educational chat, casual tone, just talking about the real estate industry process, taking any real estate questions, and try to focus on some aspects that aren't always talked about in real estate. People looking to buy or sell, or people who own a home don't necessarily realize. So tonight we're talking about appraisals. So we have a guest, Maria Nucci, who is a local South Jersey appraiser. And we're going to dive into some questions on the appraisal process and what that means for homeowners as well as buyers and sellers. So Maria, welcome. Glad you could join us.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
So I want to start out, just ask you to introduce yourself a little bit, who you are. I know you got some letters after your name there on the screen. So share a little bit yourself and your role as an appraiser.
My name's Maria Nucci. I am in Gloucester County, but I work in Gloucester, Camden, Burlington, Salem, and Cumberland counties. I am an SRA, AIRRS, which means I specialize in residential real estate appraising as well as residential real estate appraisal review. My designations are through Appraisal Institute. I also serve on the board of the Southern New Jersey Appraisal Institute chapter, and I represent my chapter for LDAC. I'll be going this year in May. And on the Residential Appraiser Committee for Appraisal Institute. And we work on ideas for residential appraisers. I started appraising in 2017 in Gloucester County. And prior to that, I was a real estate agent in Ocean County from 2009 through 2012, 13. And then we moved here.
Okay. So what you got you, you mentioned you're an agent first. What you got you into real estate in the first place, the industry?
Well, I didn't really like real estate sales so much. It was a lot of work and not a lot of money. Especially when you're a new agent, you don't have those commission checks coming in all the time. So I just felt like I was spending so much time and not making enough money. And I helped some people do some tax appeals, and they were successful with those. And I figured that that was something I'd like to do better than doing real estate sales. So I went into the appraising aspect. And I like it because I do a report and I get paid. So no commission.
So you mentioned a couple different of trade associations. Is appraisal regulated by New Jersey federal government? What regulations or licenses are in place there?
Well, we're licensed through the state of New Jersey, and we also are regulated by the Appraisal Foundation or the appraisal. There's the appraisal subcommittee, the Appraisal Foundation. There's the Appraiser Qualifications Board. Those are more national organizations. And then I belong to the Appraisal Institute, which is the leading organization for appraisers, for education and membership.
Okay, awesome. Definitely a lot of, I know there's lots of continuing education, lots of requirements to get licensed and get set up to be an appraiser.
There are. We have plenty of requirements. I am certified, which there's 3 different license types in New Jersey. There's licensed, there's certified, and then there's certified residential. Certified general. I'm certified residential, so I strictly do residential work.
Awesome. So most people are familiar that appraisals is finding the value of a property. So what different type of work do you do in finding that the value? When would somebody need an appraisal for a property?
Well, I usually do a lot of financing appraisals. I'm on the FHA panel, so I'll do FHA work and conventional work for local lenders. Other things I do are estate appraisals, divorce appraisals, bankruptcy. There's all different reasons why people need appraisals. So, but it seems like the divorce rates are pretty much up right now. So, been pretty busy.
I think that's
with
one of
that.
the COVID impacts.
Yeah, unfortunately, one of the sad impacts of COVID. So, I do pre-listing price reductions. Sometimes people need to reduce the price. Sometimes realtors want me to do that, or they want pre-listing. There's also a lot of private sales going on too, because, everybody's looking to buy a house and they know somebody, landlords are selling to tenants. So in that type of situation too.
Gotcha. I know definitely I tend to forget about all the different aspects of that, of when you might get involved. I'm involved, obviously, I'm more on the real estate transactional side, the buying and selling of property.
Oh, I also do tax appeals, but this is not a good time for a tax appeal.
Now with the rapid appreciation we have.
Yeah, no, not at all.
But no, but there's definitely I'm sure lots of different people, lots of different situations going in. I know you mentioned pre-listings, price reductions too. I've certainly talked with my clients too about bringing an appraiser in, to get a price analysis. We talked about a little bit. So I do some pricing analysis for my clients when helping them to purchase a property, put their house on the market. But that is one of the many things I do as a real estate agent, where you yourself know that pricing and the valuation of property, that is 100% what you do all in. Definitely a lot
It's the
more
only thing I do.
by far the expert. No, I tell a lot of my clients, my role as a real estate agent is to not be the expert in anything, but to know who the experts are and know enough about everything. But when the time comes, especially working with a unique property, reaching out to an appraiser might be able to get more insight, use a lot more expertise and resources on there. So on your end, what do you see as the difference between a competitive market analysis or a price analysis from a real estate agent compared to what you do in an appraisal report from an appraiser?
Well, it's really going to depend on how good the appraiser is and how good the real estate agent is. So, a lot of times there's a mismatch in the properties when the realtors put together a CMA. Sometimes they're right on the money, and sometimes there's just, a huge gap. But, it depends if you're in a neighborhood or not. Those are more than likely the easiest ones to do, is in a neighborhood. But when you have something that's more rural or on a large parcel of land or just really unique property, sometimes, an agent, sometimes they feel like they can't get it right. And then they reach out to an appraiser to help them out. And usually we step in and, sometimes we go back a little bit further in time than agents do. We look at things in a little different way and, try to come up with a value using maybe more dissimilar properties than a realtor would, or maybe more similar properties depending on the case. Sometimes you tend, not you in particular, but agents may overlook something in the neighborhood that sold a little lower for one reason or another, and they may overlook that sale. So we kind of look at the market as a whole. We apply adjustments for market conditions, for bedrooms, bathrooms, finished basements, unfinished basements, things like that. So whatever, we really take a good hard look at the differences between the subject property and the comparable sales that we select.
I know another difference too is just the product from that. Now you're doing a lot more work, diving a lot deeper. An appraisal report is definitely much more in depth of a report than what a real estate agent gives as a price analysis or recommended pricing strategy.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. It's definitely a lot more work. I mean, it may take me 8 or 12 hours to put together an appraisal report where, a realtor is going to sit there, they're going to look at some comps in the neighborhood, and it'll take, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes, a half an hour, depending on how difficult the property is to get all the comps together and put them in, in the MLS and have them do a CMA.
Right.
So it's definitely a longer process for sure, and a lot more data.
So kind of getting to the core of, and I know I've done trainings with you, I've done hours long trainings with you, but the core of finding the value for a property. What goes into that? What are kind of the rough parameters you look at?
Well, it really depends on if my methodology is the same, but I'm more limited to my comparable sales search if I'm doing something for financing for a bank, as opposed to doing something for maybe an estate or a divorce. Banks like to see the most recent sales, which, you know, in all honesty, we like the most recent sales too, because those are the best indication of the market. But sometimes when you have a property that's just so unique, or we're coming to a time right now where we don't have that many recently closed sales. So we have to look back further in time. The biggest thing I like to do is find things that are the most similar. Even if I have to go back in time, for me, that's a pretty easily supported adjustment that I can make just by looking at the market data and, see how things change over time. Sometimes it works great. Sometimes I just have to scrap that approach because the market has appreciated so much that it's just not good. But mostly I'm looking for the most similar sales. Gross living area, basement, bedroom count, bathroom count. If there's a pool, we're coming up to the spring and the summer. People like pools this time of the year.
Absolutely.
COVID has changed a lot of things, and people like to have their staycations now. They want to be in their own spaces, and they like pools a little bit more, and they like their finished basement spaces too.
And I know I'm asking you kind of an average here, but what time frame or geography, so say in Gloucester County in like a residential suburban setting, what do you look for? Like how far back in history do you go to look at closed sales, and how far distance do you try to stay from the subject property?
I try to stay, well, lending likes us to stay really close. So, we try to stay as close as possible because, of course, the three rules of real estate are location, location, location. And, as close to the effective date, which is the date of the inspection, as possible. But sometimes it's just not possible to do that. And you have to go into other areas. You have to see what the other reasonable substitutes are, because sometimes it's just not always possible to be right there in that area, within a couple of 90 days or 180 days. I'll go back a year if I have to, maybe more sometimes. But, before the market was really crazy, you could go back a year and there was some change, but not a crazy change. Now, I see appreciation in all the markets, and you really kind of want to stay as close to your effective date as you can.
So, an American favorite pastime is watching the online sites, watching your neighbors' houses. Even if you're not planning on making a move anytime soon, but constantly kind of looking out, filling out, what's my home worth? So if I'm a homeowner, I'm going to a site, and one of the most common out there is Zillow, to go see the homes that are listed for sale, the homes that sold recently. What am I looking for in my neighbors' homes that might be affecting my home value?
Well, I guess you're going to look for the differences. That's a tough one with Zillow. I don't know. I
So
would say
we're talking the other day about Zillow, and they do have their Zestimate, their online price analysis, and you had a certain
we see the
explanation.
the A in Zillow stands for accuracy.
Gotcha.
So, a lot of times their estimates aren't accurate. I mean, you could look on their website to see what has sold in your area and how it does compare to your property, and sometimes you'll have, different types of properties in the neighborhood. If you have a neighborhood that was established in the 50s and 60s, you'll probably have ranches, capes, buys, splits. So, you always want to try to compare apples to apples. If you have a split level, you want to compare to a split level. If you have a buy level, you want to compare to a buy level. Same with the capes and the ranches and the colonials. You just want to try to compare like for like as much as possible. And for me, I see square footage is usually the biggest driver of value.
I agree. I know on the Zestimate too, on the Zillow, some of the other sites, when they pull an automated valuation, you can even dig down and click, and you can see what comps that they've pulled. Just like you're saying, like type properties. You might have a rancher, but they pulled a bunch of buy levels or duplexes or completely dissimilar houses. And that's they come up with that automated valuation.
Right. And then in the end, when you do an appraisal, we have to use like for like, as long as they're there. That's what we really like to use, because those are the best indicators of value, because it's going to draw the same market participant, and that's what we do. We measure their reaction. It's not like we just make up a value. We look at the reactions of the market participants and see, okay, well, why did they pay more for this, or why did they pay less for that, or why doesn't it matter? Because at this point in time, kind of like anything goes. They're overlooking a lot of things like condition and location, because there's a shortage of inventory that's available.
Right. As we keep going too, I just wanted to share with everybody, if you have any questions come to mind on appraisals or home valuation in the market, feel free to hop in the comments and share that. And we'll be happy to answer the best we can any questions anybody has. A lot of questions I have tonight came from my experiences working with clients in the transaction, different questions I've run into personally, working through real estate on the appraisal end of things. So the majority of the time that most people hear about an appraiser is when they're doing their home purchase. They're purchasing a house and somebody says, usually the mortgage lender, hey, we need to get an appraisal. I think you're in an unfortunate position because a lot of people see and work with their realtor. They work with their mortgage loan officer. At closing, they get to meet the title person who's closing on their house. But nobody knows about this invisible appraiser who at some point sneaks into the property and does their thing and issues a report that gives a green or red light to everything.
Yeah, we are kind of the unsung zero or heroes of the transaction.
You got
So
it.
yeah, we don't get to meet many people. It's nice when the realtors meet us at the property. Some appraisers like that, some don't. Some realtors like to meet the appraiser, some don't. I like to meet the realtor there if they're there. They usually have a lot of information to offer. Usually they're handing me comps if they have them, or CMA, whatever they have to price the property. But no, we don't get to meet too many people in the transaction until maybe the end. If something goes haywire, then we start meeting everybody.
So I've had buyers ask me, when's the appraiser going to be at the property? Can I go out? Can I meet the appraiser? Have you ever run into that question? No. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't really care who I meet at the property. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't affect, my work at all. Meeting people. If the buyer wants to be there, the buyer could be there. Or if the seller wants to be there, the seller, if it's their house, of course, somebody has to be there. Sometimes nobody wants to meet the appraiser, but I have never intentionally met a buyer at the appraisal. Sometimes I'll go during the home inspection and the buyer will be there.
Okay.
But I've never had anybody specifically say, oh, can I meet the appraiser there? We're not really that interesting, I think. Like I said, only time we're interesting is if the value's off. So
you brought up home inspections. I've had lots of buyers ask me, and I'm certainly familiar with this. But I'm getting a home inspection, or I have to get the appraisal. Do I need to have both a home inspection and an appraisal?
Well, I guess that depends on what the buyer wants. I mean, the bank's going to ask you for the appraisal. The bank's going to get the appraisal. They're not even going to ask anybody. They're going to get the appraisal. And the buyer's going to want to get the home inspection. So, they want to protect themselves as much as possible. Make sure they're not buying any headaches.
And that's definitely my advice too. That while the process for an inspection and appraisal seems very familiar with a professional going out to the property, but they're definitely two very different purposes. If you're getting a mortgage on for the purchase, you need to have that appraisal. But your end goal is to assessing the value of the property. Though you do take a look at some condition factors, the health and safety at the property. But it's very different than a home inspector who goes out who's looking at a good, hard, expert look in his or her point of view on the condition of the property. They don't know value is not their concern.
No, they're definitely there to look at condition. And, we do somewhat too. We're looking at the overall condition of the property, but our level of observation is very different than what a home inspector would do.
How long does it typically take you? Again, I try not to use typical, but no, and non-typical. But for a house, now, if you're doing a in-person visit for an appraisal, how long are you typically at a property?
Well, it depends on the size of the property. If it's a small, little ranch that doesn't have a basement, if it is an FHA, I might be in and out in 15 or 20 minutes. But if it's something that's a larger property, it's going to take more time to measure, especially as if there's angles and ceiling slopes and height issues. And then again, it depends on the condition of the property and how many pictures that I have to take to document deferred maintenance or broken items, things that need to be repaired, and you know, whatever else I might have to document while I'm there. So it really depends on the size of the house as to the length of the inspection, but usually between 15 and 20 minutes to sometimes 30 to 40 minutes.
Gotcha. I think that's one of the differences too with the home inspection is a home inspector might be at a property, the same property for 2 hours, where you might have a
Right.
20-minute visit. But again, a lot of your work is not, visiting the property on site is just a piece of your work. A lot of it I know is behind the scenes, public records, going to the multiple listing service and pulling the data and the comparables as well.
Yeah, most of my work is at the desk. I mean, by far going out to the property and, just being there and doing the measurements and being out in the field, that's my favorite part. My least favorite part is to sit here all day and type reports, but it's all part of the job.
Especially days like today or this week, actually. It's been great.
Yeah, it's nice out and I'm stuck in the office.
So you mentioned, measuring a property. Something I have come up a lot. What is the definition of a bedroom that you use when determining something is a bonus room, an office, or a bedroom?
Typically, and that goes to the market participants and what they accept as a bedroom, but we typically should have an egress window and a closet. If there's not a closet in there, sometimes there's a cost to cure it. You might be able to put a closet in, or maybe they could put a wardrobe, like a permanent wardrobe in there to cure the closet issue. But and interior, a lot of times people say that there's a bedroom and I go there and it's an interior room. It doesn't have a window. It doesn't have any access to the outside. That's not a bedroom. You need to have egress. So that's the bigger issue.
Is there a certain square footage you look for in that qualification?
Some municipalities do have a size requirement. So, that would be like local code, but you know, it's what the market is willing to accept as bedrooms. And sometimes you have those, older capes and the ceilings are short and the sides are sloped, but people still accept those for bedrooms. And they usually don't have a closet in. Sometimes they do, but sometimes the closet's kind of like tucked into the sloped attic and you don't have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of closet space, but people still, by custom, accept those as bedrooms.
I know I
So
get
it
that
depends on the
question.
market.
No, when showing a house, no, does this count as one of the bedrooms? Does it not? And part of that difficulty there is no one clear definition of a bedroom.
Well, it's true, and I could say that it's an office or a den, but that wouldn't stop somebody else from using it as a bedroom.
Right.
I mean, in reality.
No, and I do tell people too, no, you're usually getting a certificate of occupancy at the time you buy a house. No, they look for a bedroom count and how it's set up. Again, depending on the municipality. But after that, and there's no further inspections once you own a home. No, if you want to set up your house however you like, whatever works for you and your family, that
Right.
works for you. Another question on the purchasing end. So typically, no, a buyer's using a mortgage to purchase a property. The lender hits up the buyer saying, all right, it's time to pay for the appraisal. They take that payment from the buyer. And then the lender goes and hires you. So who are you working for as your client in that scenario?
My client in that situation is always the bank. So the bank is the client, and they get the appraisal. They pay. Well, sometimes it goes through a management company, a third party appraisal management company. I don't usually do that kind of work. I go direct to the, I work with lenders that work directly with the appraisers, and the lender's the client and the lender is the intended user. If it's FHA, the FHA becomes the intended user as well. So, they get the report, and it's up to the bank or the lender client to send the report to the buyer. And, the appraiser can't do that. And we're required by USPAP to have confidentiality. And once we have that appraisal prepared for the specific client, an intended user, we can't give it to anybody else. So, a lot of times people will be upset with me. The borrower will call, they'll get my information from the appraisal report. Yeah, and they'll call to ask me questions, which I can't answer. They have to send it through the bank. The agents will call and ask me for a copy of the report. I can't give it to them. It can only come from the bank. So the bank will give it to the borrower. Now, if the borrower wants to share it with the agents in the transaction, which a lot of times, if the value is lower than the contract price, then they'll share the report so everybody could see what the issue is. But basically, that's it. It's just we deal with the client, and we can't talk to anybody else in the transaction regarding any kind of value or any conclusions that we find.
I think it's important to highlight too, because people get confused in that. And it is the lender who is the client. The lender does pass the cost of the appraisal onto the end buyer of the home,
Right.
as the cost of the transaction doing the business. But in that sense, the purpose of an appraisal, before the mortgage company shells out the money to someone's going to become a homeowner, they want to make sure they're making a good investment. And then
Absolutely.
they don't want to, in short, they don't want to lend you $200,000 for a $100,000 home, because the bank's going to get the short end of the stick on that one.
Right, and FHA doesn't want to insure that either. So,
right,
that's the other issue.
So a couple of things you talked about. You talked about different loan types. The most common being conventional loans, FHA and VA, backed federal government loans. From the appraisal point of view, what's the differences in those mortgages, and how does that affect the appraisal?
The only differences that I really know about is how I have to conduct the appraisal inspection and prepare the appraisal report. Other than that, I have to say I'm a little embarrassed. I don't know that much about behind the scenes with the conventional and FHA buyers, on the mortgage side. I don't really know much about that. What I do know is the appraisal side. So FHA, if you're buying FHA or USDA, they're subject to the HUD Handbook 4000.1 minimum property requirements. So there can't be any deficiencies in the property. Sometimes there'll be a wet basement. FHA does not want a wet basement. Peeling and chipping paint. And I think that seems to be the most common issue is the peeling and chipping paint, because we have a lot of properties that were built in, like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And then there's some deferred maintenance with paint around the window trim and, decks and the exterior, even the interior, you'll get peeling and chipping paint. So all that is supposed to be remedied before they close. But it's really any safety issue that we see, maybe, the old capes or, a lot of the old splits or buys, they don't have handrails. It's always a safety issue. And believe it or not, it can even be an issue for a conventional loan. If the appraiser feels like it's a health or safety issue, they could say, okay, well, that has to be fixed. Sometimes the lender wants it fixed too. So, mostly the health and safety issues. And I do come across the railing thing a lot.
That makes sense.
Where they don't have handrails. And, it's first floor to second floor, first floor to basement, outside too, around decks. Sometimes people, the decks are built up high and there's no railing around it. So Those are things that we look for, mostly in FHA, but again, sometimes it can be done in conventional loans.
And that's something we talk a lot too, with sellers now in a multiple offer scenario where they're looking at buyers with different loan types. Looking those types of loans with the appraisal in mind for that condition. But a lot of times it's keeping in mind what the property is. No property that's in great shape, newly renovated or very well kept, is not going to have a big difference in issues in an FHA appraisal or a conventional issue. Like I said, if it has the safety conditions, not the peeling paint, it may not always be an issue, even though sometimes people will look at those loans differently, but it may not come up.
Right.
Something else you had mentioned. So we're working with a buyer and a seller. They came together. They're going to purchase a house for $250,000 using a mortgage. The lender sends out an appraiser who comes back and says the property is worth $230,000. I'm sure that never happens. I know it does. So on your end, what do you see as that process there? No, buyer and seller agreed on a price, and appraiser comes back and says, "Hey, the property is not worth that price you agreed to."
Well, there's a formal process that the buyer has to go through called a reconsideration of value. So the first thing they want to do is get in touch with the lender and say, okay, well, we feel like the property was worth more money than the appraiser thinks it's worth. And then you're supposed to submit 3 comps to the bank, and they should be vetted, to make sure that they are better than the comps that the appraiser selected. And, you would also want to say why these are better comps. I mean, they can't just be better comps because they sold for more money. They may have sold for more money because they're bigger, or because they have an in-ground pool, or they have a finished basement, something that the subject doesn't have. Just because it sold for more money doesn't mean it's better. And sometimes we have, these insane scenarios where you'll have an outlier in the neighborhood that sold for so much money because somebody had the cash to buy it and it didn't get financed. Or they, had a conventional purchase, but it was a small amount and they put a whole bunch of money down and it didn't matter. So, we look at those outliers in the neighborhood too and figure out, is that typical motivation on a buyer, or is that just an outlier? And we can't just hang our hat on that one comp because it's an outlier. And that usually is the one that everybody's holding on to,
Of course.
saying, well, we have this one. And I say, well, I already considered that one, but here's the scenario behind it because I've already verified it with the listing agent, the buyer's agent, or maybe both of them if I get the chance to speak to both of them to find out what kind of went on behind the scenes. And it depends on the time of year too. If you have something that sold really high in the summer, but you're doing the appraisal in the spring of the following year, and people are still holding on to that comp because it's the best one and the highest one in the neighborhood, it may not even be relevant anymore. So to answer your question, the comps should be more relevant than the ones the appraiser used. Gotcha. And they can't be closed after the appraisal was completed. They would have to be closed before the appraisal was completed.
So timing is always a factor.
Yeah. And, that's a lot of times I'll get realtors saying, here you go, here's listings. Well, they're not a fact yet. They're not a fact until they close. So, right. They're a good indication of where the market's heading, but they're not market value, or their sale price is not a fact until that transaction has closed. And if there's concessions, and that's the other thing that real estate agents don't consider, or were there any concessions? Because sometimes there's a nice chunk of concessions on there that if it drove up the sale price, we have to take, we should take it off if there's an effect on market value there.
Good point. And on my side too, working with, I have had clients on the buy side and sell side where the appraised value does not come in as that sales price. So working through the reconsideration of value, if there are comps that maybe the appraiser missed or didn't consider. And a lot of we go back to our contract, know what the contract states about negotiations at that point.
I mean, typically I'll ask I usually ask the the listing agent, hey, what comps do you have? You know, do you have a CMA? Do you have comps? What do you have for me that's going to support this? And sometimes they don't have anything. And, you know, that's concerning because did they do their job when they listed the property? Did they list it for the right price, or did we just put what the seller wanted on there and, you know, hope for the best at the end? And that's what makes my job a little harder. You know, when you have that sort of a situation where nobody could support anything, but then at the end, you know, you do have that offer and you have that contract price because maybe there's a shortage and so many people bid up on it. And, you know, you have that demand,
No,
but
we definitely
you
have
know,
much
the
more of
price
a
might not be there.
emotional part on putting the deals together in the home search process. Definitely over the last couple of years, a lot of emotions come into play, and I think that
Sure.
the appraiser comes in bringing kind of that logic and that.
Yeah, I mean, I have gotten some love letters from real estate agents and from buyers as well, but we are probably the only unemotional person in that transaction.
Right.
You know,
No, it helps too that no, your compensation, like several other people in the transaction, is not tied to the close of the sale.
no, it isn't. Nope.
Unlike, to be honest, unlike your real estate agent, your title company, your lender, um, all get paid when it closes. So, no, we do have an interest in seeing get to closing.
Yeah, we get a fee and we get paid whether the deal closes or not.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have no commission.
The other thing I wanted to share too, for everyone, you hear a lot in the news about appraisal gaps or incorrectly appraisal waivers, going in on contracts and making an offer to make it stand out as much as possible. No, appraisal waiver is one that cracks me up. In the New Jersey contract, the word appraisal does not appear. We have a mortgage contingency, and the mortgages require an appraisal process. So if you're using a mortgage, unless your lender, there's certain ways they can do so. Unless they give you the green light that we're not doing an appraisal, they usually do need an appraisal if you're purchasing with a mortgage. And then the appraisal gap is that buyer's guarantee up front saying, if this house doesn't appraise for the sales price, we have the extra cash and we're guaranteeing that we're going to pay, on top of the appraised value to reach our sales price. It's something you see a lot, in the news and the clickbait articles that comes out.
I see it a lot in the contracts that I get. You know,
Mhm.
mostly everyone has some sort of an appraisal gap. And sometimes they don't even put a cap on it, which is a little scary.
That's a blank check right there.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And I
that's
think now with the current market, that's contributing some of the rapid appreciation. If a house doesn't appraise, but somebody paid intentionally $10,000 above the appraised value in cash, when the next house goes to sell in that neighborhood or within that specific area, that house that just sold for that 10,000 over the appraised value becomes the new comp for the next one.
right, and that's market value. That's what they were willing to pay.
Actually, I saw the most issues in about mid 2020 with appraisals because that high demand kind of came out of nowhere. When we first started coming back out of our homes, strong demand to find houses to buy and got extremely competitive fast. I think the issues we had with appraisals is the closed sales weren't there. Looking
Right.
back in early 2020, the end of 2019 was a normalish market, and then we jumped into a really hot competitive market. Everyone's competing to get up top, but that's what I saw in the appraisals is those comp sales hadn't closed yet.
Right, you had that lag.
Mm-hmm.
So there was definitely a lag, but moving forward, I think once everything started to appreciate, I think it started to settle down. I mean, we still do see some crazy things, but people have, I think it's the market participants that have just said, okay, well, we're going to be willing to cover this. And I think that has really increased the market exponentially. And, it definitely will help the prices increase because that extra money's there and they're not really depending on the appraisal to make sure that the value's there. They'll just cover it.
Right. Now, a lot of it, so much of what we do just comes down to supply and demand. So right now, having that shortage of homes creates the demand, and that's the buyers going above and beyond to get the home they're looking for. So we talked a lot about the buyer side in a real estate transaction. As a seller, is there anything I should do to prepare for an appraisal, or even not as a seller, but no, in a divorce, estate, a bankruptcy situation? If it's my house and appraiser is coming to, what should I do to get ready?
Well, most of the people like to clean, but I always tell them I don't care how you live. It doesn't matter to me. I'm not here to judge. So I think the biggest issue for me, and maybe even a lot of other appraisers, are pets. I love pets, but they get in the way. They can't be in the pictures for the banks. So, a lot of times we'll have to crop them out, but that's the biggest issue. So if people could, maybe take, if there's a dog or two, maybe take them out for a walk or put them outside. But then that becomes another issue too, because we have to get outside to measure the perimeter of the dwelling. So, a lot of times people will put them in a crate, but then, of course they're barking. So maybe the best thing would be just to take them for walk if they can. But mostly have the doors open, have the lights turned on. I don't even mind if somebody's there and wants to give me the tour, because that makes sure that I don't miss anything. And then especially, if you have a pet that's there and, you have a barking dog, because you're a stranger in their house, sometimes you miss something. You might overlook it. And then, you go back to the MLS and you go, oh, where's the picture of that bathroom? I didn't get the half bathroom on the first floor, just for some distraction. And then, try not to have people, this has happened, people are in the bathroom, they're taking a shower. I'm trying to, get through the house, do the inspection. I have back to back to back appraisals, and, people are just taking a shower. So that's helpful if nobody's using the bathroom. If people aren't sleeping, we do need to take pictures of all the rooms for the banks. And if we don't take pictures, they're just going to send us back out. So, they'll make the appraisal subject to inspection of that room and taking a photo. So, we need all these pictures, and, sometimes you'll go, and if it's early in the morning, kids will be sleeping. So you want to make sure everybody's cleared out of the rooms if possible. A lot of times I'll just tell people just to jockey them from one room to another, even the pets. We'll just move them from one room to the other. But it goes a lot quicker if all the doors are open and, people aren't in rooms, bathrooms, and, everything's easily accessible. Oh, the other thing for FHA, we have to inspect the attic and a crawl space if there is. Have that open. Sometimes you'll get there and, maybe there's a drop down stairs and there's no pull for it. So we can't do the attic, and then we have to go back. It just costs time and money for the borrower.
Gotcha. So easily, accessible, open. You had a very good point about the pets. I hadn't thought about it before.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And, we can't have people in the pictures. So then, there's a lot of cropping and a lot of blurring.
I would say too, no, anytime I'm working with someone who's preparing their house for potential buyers, putting it on the market, no, as bright as possible, as decluttered, clear as possible. Certainly not to a lesser end with an appraiser, but certainly can't hurt there.
Yeah, we don't worry so much about that.
It can never hurt to have a well-lit house. No, easy to walk through, easy to.
Yeah, it does show better in the appraisal pictures too, but we deal with whatever we deal with, because we know we're dealing with people in the middle. I'm always dealing with people in the middle of chaos, whether they're moving or if it's a divorce or an estate, it's some kind of chaos in the house. So I try to make it as smooth as possible for the people, but we're used to dealing with it, and we look beyond, as long as it's not like really an excessive clutter situation. We could just look beyond that.
Gotcha. Two specific questions on values I have come up a lot. The solar guys come to my door often. They always say that if they put solar in my house, it's going to add value to my house. So what's your thoughts there, and what's the process of finding a valuation for solar?
Well, the only way we could put a value on solar is if it's an owned system. So most of the solar that people have will be a power purchase agreement or a lease or maybe a solar loan. And there's a UCC filing on it, which means that that solar system belongs to the solar company. It doesn't belong to the property owner. So as long as it's not part of their real estate, even though it's attached to the roof, it is not their property. It belongs to somebody else. We can't put a value on it. And Fannie Mae is very clear on that. You know, if it's not an owned system, we can't value it.
Very
So
good.
yeah, they're going to tell you whatever they want to tell you to sell you a system. But, you know, and then the other issue is agents have to really take a good hard look at that contract and see what it's saying. What is the term? What is the qualifications to, you know, because the buyers have to qualify to have the the lease or whatever agreement they have turned over into their name. So they need to qualify for that. So
Mhm.
can the buyers qualify for it? Is it going to put it outside of their pre-qualification range? So is it going to put them over the top? So you really have to look at all the terms. Everybody needs to have the solar paperwork. You know, we need it too as appraisers, and a lot of times I I hear from the agents, well, I don't have it, and then the lender says, well, we don't have it, but we need it. We have to look at it, see what kind of terms are there, who owns the system, and it's just all part of the process. So
Mhm.
yeah, make sure that you have a copy of whatever sort of an agreement you have or the owner has with the solar company. But no, you're typically not going
No
to see a
different.
value unless it's owned. And
Which
even
in my
when
experience
it's
is
owned, you may not
fairly
see it.
fairly uncommon in our area to see owned solar. I know it's out there, but it's much more
Yeah,
common for the leased in the PPA.
there's some more in the rural markets than like more in Salem County. I see a lot of owned stuff in Salem County
That makes sense.
for some reason.
Similar to that, no, I just spent $20,000 to put in a great pool at my house. Does that add $20,000 of value to my house?
I always say it depends. It depends on the neighborhood. It depends what people are paying. I remember one time at the very beginning of COVID, there was a sale in a neighborhood, and when I talked to the agent, he said, "Oh, well, that was the buyer. The buyer just wanted a house with a pool. She needed it. She wanted it for the summer. There was a wait list to get pools. So she just overpaid by like $30,000 because it had a pool and she didn't care." But, yeah, pools usually bring some extra money in some markets, but not all of them. If you look in Glassboro, you may not see any value for a pool. You might see a negative value because all the student housing. So it's really going to be neighborhood specific. Where in Mullica Hill, in the neighborhoods where you have 3 to 4,000 square foot homes, it might be expected. So you will see, depending on the price range of, the houses, it would be worth more money in a more expensive neighborhood, less money in a less expensive neighborhood.
Makes sense. I know it also would impact too. Know the type of pool. There's lots of pools once you get into it. I have a friend who's a pool inspector who goes nuts anytime they see a listing and description just says house has a pool. It's a very broad, between a inflatable above ground pool to a full gunite, heated indoor pool. Definitely has a huge swing there in cost. And then
Well, if it's an in-ground pool, there's usually value, but if it's an above-ground pool, that's personal property, so we don't even consider that as part of, as any adjustment,
okay,
because it's personal property that could be taken away in any time. Same as a hot tub, unless it's a hot tub that's built into, like usually the pools that have a spa or a hot tub in them.
that's a good point. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Have a question from Chuck. Can you explain ANSI?
Sure.
And
ANSI. ANSI. Okay, so it's the American National. I'm sorry, I don't know the whole acronym for it, but it's the way that we have to measure houses. So we measure houses from the outside, and they have to be measured to 1/10 of an inch, which
Wow.
is right. And that's for conventional mortgages. FHA did not adopt ANSI standards yet, but I'm sure they're going to very shortly. So the problem with ANSI is a if the improvement is below grade, it doesn't get counted in the square footage. So say you have a bi-level or a split level. And split levels, usually by local tradition, we would count the lower level, the main level, and the upper level all as part of the gross living area. That's what the tax assessor does in most of the municipalities. But with ANSI, you count the main level, the upper level, and then that lower level would go below grade.
Gotcha.
Now, that's going to cause a difference in the tax record, as you know, in what's on the tax record. So it may say on the tax record that it's 1,800 square feet, but when we come out and measure it out, it may only be 1,300 square feet. And then we have that below grade square footage. And the challenge becomes getting the property record cards for all the comps. And this is where your comps have to be more similar, and you have to compare, a split level to a split level because of that lower level. And you want to just compare like to like. It's an issue with the Cape Cods because if there's a slope ceiling, half of the width has to be at 7 feet. And you know how those capes come.
Oh yeah, that's
You have those, right, they get tight up there. Some of them don't have any sections of it where it's 7 feet. It's just really short. So then we have to count that as maybe I usually will count it as a finished attic space and note the bedrooms that are up there. But then that goes on a separate line item, and it kind of becomes arranged with a finished attic.
okay.
So, it's just really how we're measuring the properties. And it becomes, like I said, that's when it becomes the bigger problem, is when you're dealing with, the 1950s and 60s properties that do have stuff below grade. And unfortunately, when you're in a neighborhood where you have a colonial that's on a slab, and then you'll have a bi-level that's partially below grade, the tax records will look very similar. But in actuality, it's going to be very different, because now you're going to kind of have like a ranch with a finished basement for the bi-level, and the colonial is going to have a different square footage.
So you just have to take the apple, the orange, and the banana and make them all look the same.
And we try to keep the apples and the oranges together, and not mix the
Of
fruit. But,
course, exactly.
it is what it is some days.
So coming up to an end here, kind of want to put you on the spot a little bit. Any funny stories, fun experiences you've had? No, any of these appraisal visits where you've had maybe a surprise?
A surprise. Nothing really comes to mind lately. I did get chased out of a house not that long ago because the guy didn't want me to take pictures.
Oh,
Yeah, that's a big issue. People don't realize that when you're coming into the house, you're going to take pictures. And, I'll tell the agents, hey, I'm going to take pictures, make sure the seller knows. Or when I make the phone call for a refi, I'll talk to the husband and tell him, okay, make sure your wife knows I'm going to be taking pictures of the house. Because everybody gets upset if the house isn't clean. But not that long ago, I had a guy, the house was pretty much falling apart, and he wouldn't let me take any pictures of the inside of the house. So
it's a little difficult to document.
Yeah, it does. It does. But no, unfortunately, I can't recall any really funny stories.
Okay.
I mean, I have some really weird ones and gross ones, but
You can share more privately.
yeah,
So obviously you have your tabs on the real estate market. That's 100% of what you do, looking property by property. Um, what's kind of your overall feeling, the current market, where we might be headed? What's any thoughts there?
wait a minute. I got to get my magic 8 ball. No, I have. I don't know. I don't really think at this point any of us know what's going to happen. I know we have a shortage. I see it in every single market. Most markets are less than a month's worth of inventory. Today I did one that was a 2 month inventory, which I was like, oh, wow, we have a lot of inventory here.
Swimming in houses.
Yeah. But the problem is, when there's no inventory, the prices aren't going to go down because you're still going to have people who are willing to pay. They may not have as much effective demand. It may take a little bit longer to sell a house, but they're still going to pay because they don't have any other choices.
Right.
So, I don't know. I wish I had an answer, but like
I
you,
think
I,
that's
I
what
just know.
we're all searching for.
I know.
Yeah, but some core things you mentioned, no, I agree with. People talk about the housing crash. When's that coming? Again, a lot of it comes to supply and demand. As long as we're short on houses, no, it's kind of hard to have a crash in prices.
Yeah.
People are competing to purchase homes. Prices don't go down in that scenario.
And, I've spoken to a couple of my real estate appraiser friends, and, we're all seeing the same thing. It kind of just leveled off for a little while with the insanity with the contracts. But now we're back to that again,
Mhm.
where, you have the buyers just going over ask. They're willing to pay the difference. So we're back to that scenario again.
Yep. Um, I don't pay a lot of attention to the national real estate market. No, I only function in South Jersey. But I think we're beginning to see across the country a bit of a split too, where East Coast and West Coast in different areas are having different trends. In the past, we said, hey, no, prices are appreciating. We're short on houses everywhere. It looks like now we're seeing a bit more of different cities, different states, different areas are seeing a bit of that having their own market conditions.
Yeah, and I'm really anxious to see what the spring market brings. I was waiting to see what quarter one was going to do for 2023. Looked like quarter one was pretty strong, so I'm anxious to see where the spring market's headed. I think that's going to be strong because it's the spring market. It's always strong.
Right.
And when we have a shortage, as long as we have something out there, for people to buy, they're going to continue to buy houses. But, when you have the shortage, it's just going to drive the prices up.
Yep. Absolutely. So just about wrapping up. Any final thoughts? Anything else you wanted to share?
No, but I enjoy having these conversations. I always enjoy having conversations with you. I like to see what the agents have on their minds because they help me put myself in the buyer's shoes and see what the buyers are thinking in that market. So it's just nice to have this open dialogue, and I appreciate that.
Of course. No, always a pleasure. No, I like working with you, even though we're not working the same deals, not working for the same clients, that to have you as a resource and hopefully vice versa. I know we've called upon you
Absolutely.
to pick each other. All right, what was up with this house? What am I missing now? Was the grass greener? Why is this one off from all the
Yeah,
others?
that's always a question I have for the agents. Like and especially, like as appraisers, we come across problems, and sometimes you just look at things and you lay all the cards out and it just doesn't look right. And you go, what is going on? And it's key to talk to the agents in the transaction just to figure out what happened here. And
Hmm.
usually they'll tell you the story, and it's usually something crazy. Somebody really need to get in that house, whatever. And you get the whole story, but we have to kind of work together to figure these things out, you know? And I think agents hold the key to the story.
Definitely. Maybe not the reason why, but at least some explanation.
Yeah, some, yeah.
No, and I do
Don't
know
make
from
me money.
experience you're very thorough in your work, doing your research, talking to agents from closed sales to find out that information.
That's the best part of the job.
Calling from stuck locked away in front of your computer, you still get to call people and have the conversations.
Absolutely.
Final question. Now we talked about the different scenarios someone might need an appraisal. Like you mentioned, not always happy scenarios, but divorces, separations, bankruptcies, estates, refinances, or purchases. If somebody has more questions, they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Well, you could get me on Facebook. You could call my cell. You could go on my website, njrealestateappraisers.com. Email me. Could call you. You could refer me.
Absolutely. Always happy to pass on your information.
Thank you.
All right. And website was
njrealestateappraisers.com. Email is sjappraisalassociates@gmail.com.
And also on Facebook. And then if you ever can't find Maria, hit me up and I'll get you right in touch.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for sharing all your expertise and insight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Nick. It was a pleasure.
All right. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.